From the day he took office on January 20th this year, US President Joe Biden has been faced with various political, economic and social challenges at home, as well as geopolitical ones abroad amid the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic and Washington's rivalry with Beijing. Upon his 6-month mark, we review President Biden's handling of major issues and discuss how he might take things forward. For this, we connect with Dr. Mark SHANAHAN, Head of Department of Politics and International Relations at the University of Reading. And we also connect with Dr. Nancy Snow, Distinguished Professor of Public Diplomacy at the Kyoto University of Foreign Studies and Professor Emeritus of Communications at California State University, Fullerton. Very warm welcome to you both. Thank you so much for joining us. And well, let's start with you, Mark. Now, President Biden, having just concluded his second quarter in office, his approval rating is at around 53%, which is slightly down from his first quarter average of about 56%. I want to know what you make of his recent approval rating and what have been his major achievements over the past 6 months.
Okay, well, to have an approval rating in the 50s is not actually too bad at all. If you think of Donald Trump, he never broke 50% for approval in his whole time in office in the White House. So staying above 50 in a hugely divided country, and I think this is what it shows us most, is how divided America remains. Being above 50 is no bad thing for Joe Biden. He's kept the majority on board. He's done that both domestically with really taking the fight to COVID, putting a number of executive actions in place that have speeded up the vaccine rollout. He has also spent his time rolling back Trump policy. So policy that was very unpopular with Democrats, whether it was building the wall or banning people entering the country from Muslim states, whether it was environmental issues. So he cancelled the Keystone pipeline, for instance. He has played to his own side somewhat, but he's also played to the many, many people who occupy the middle ground in American politics. What he's not done, which Trump did before him, is just play solely to his base and just go for the ratings. He's looking to put some much bigger plans in place. But for now, those first 6 months, he's been probably a little bit more radical than we thought he was going to. And perhaps his biggest achievement of all, he's kept his own party largely on side and together. It's a big tent party. That's no mean achievement.
And well, now, Nancy, over the last 6 months, President Biden has made it clear that his #1 foreign policy priority is balancing China and, of course, bolstering US alliances around the world to do so. And President Xi Jinping of China, he's responded by saying that foreign oppressors are going to have their heads cracked and bleeding, and his government imposed sanctions on 7 US individuals and entities under its new anti-foreign sanctions law on Friday. To what extent do you see the rivalry between the two countries intensifying? And of course, we saw over the weekend Deputy Secretary of State Wendy Sherman visiting China. What do you think was the purpose of her meeting with Foreign Minister Wang Yi?
You know, Wendy Sherman is a name that should be very familiar to us in foreign affairs. She's been around Washington for several decades, has worked closely with the Clinton administration, and knows her way around the State Department. I don't think that there has been a great gain from what we've seen, though, with her recent meeting. We saw what happened with this confrontation in Alaska following the trip by the Secretary of State and Secretary of Defense back in the winter. And the American people now are really sort of being galvanized to become quite anti-China, and China's responding to this. Now, again, the Biden approach is different. It's much more multilateral. As you mentioned, it's working with allies. But this, too, is problematic because many of these allies, including countries in Europe and leaders there, they're sort of betwixt and between. They want to continue good economic ties with China. How can we avoid that, after all? but also they're not going to go quite as far maybe as the Biden administration would want them to go on human rights and on addressing ongoing concerns of the Uyghurs, the Muslim in the region of the Northwest. And so this is really going to be kind of an impasse. And what worries me is that the China-U.S. relationship could become, and it's already out there, a new Cold War. Bernie Sanders wrote about that. He was a presidential candidate. He wrote an article to make that point back in June. And he said that we're really losing the common ground that we need: climate change, sustainability. Let's try to make progress on these common areas of concern and not go too far in pushing back against China on human rights, because China's ready to push back against the United States, notably to point out that we're a divided country, that we're not united. And this is something that President Xi keeps emphasizing in his speeches, that the Chinese people are united in how they view global affairs, and that the U.S. is rather weak in this position.
And well, China does keep telling the U.S. to look to its own democracy or to look to its own society when it points out problems with China's human rights abuses and the way its governance system runs. And while back in the US, Mark, there are still a sizable number of voters who believe that elections held in 2020 were fraudulent, and they also believe conspiracy theories about COVID-19 vaccines, climate change and so forth. Why do you think this is? Do you see this sort of bipartisan divide narrowing anytime soon?
Yeah, you've almost got two separate issues in one there that have become conflated together. In terms of why people jump to the conspiracy theories, we are living in an age of fake news. And what's happened, and we've been doing some work about this in Reading, is that you're increasingly seeing some of the more mainstream right-leaning networks, broadcast networks, people like Fox, particularly journalists of the like of Tucker Carlson, who have tapped into the streams of conspiracy theories, odd ideas that are coming out, some of the random tweets and straightforward lies, and they get amplified, they get given an air of authenticity because they're coming from somebody who appears as a serious journalist. Carlson is one example. There are many across News America, so across the airwaves, be it on radio or on to the right TV networks, and certainly across social media, that just amplify these stories. So for a lot of people, it's quite difficult still to work out what really is true. And you had a former president, so Trump, who started building this story to play out why he had the election supposedly stolen from him. I think Trump knew he was going to lose from quite a long way out. So this was the story that he started building and cultivating very, very early in the election cycle last time. And it has stuck. And I would suggest that actually the number of people who truly believe the election was stolen is rather small. But there's a rather larger group of people who would like this to be the case and see it as a way for a Trumpist Republican group to get back into power.
And Mark, now 44% of Americans now identify themselves as independents. And well, what do you think will really influence their votes for the upcoming 2022 midterm elections?
Pretty simple. It's the economy. It generally is in America. If the economy is moving, if people have jobs, if they see some security around those jobs and they see the economy improving for them in their pay packet, in their wallets, then whoever is in government, whoever is the incumbent, is probably more likely to get their vote. So if Biden can follow through on his big policy pledges around infrastructure and around human infrastructure, and drive that through to 2022, then the Democrats could do well in these midterms. But it is a risky midterm for them. And of course, there's the Trump factor. We don't know quite what's going to happen with him. And he could have a massive effect on this next election.
And while abroad, President Biden is having to appeal to his strongest allies in the Indo-Pacific. Nancy, the US is seeking to strengthen trilateral relations between Seoul, Washington and Tokyo. But over the last 6 months, it doesn't seem that there's been much progress on that front. So do you think with some key leadership elections coming up in both South Korea and Japan, where bilateral ties are very highly politicized, do you think the window for reconciliation between the two countries is closing? And what did you make of the trilateral meeting of the foreign ministers last week?
Well, I think that there is a window of opportunity here for the countries to come together, but I really also want to speak to the domestic politics situation. You mentioned the percentage of political independents. I'm one of those political independents. And I think what's happening in the United States is right now, people are not terribly focused on the trilateral relations as much as people in East Asia are, naturally. And I think it's up to the Biden administration to continue to roll out an understanding of why the region is so critical, why these relations are so critical, because we're really sort of going into two different camps, one an authoritarian state and region, and also another that's more democratic. And we need democratic country participation to forge better relations with North Korea. We need to pay more attention to what's beyond even the Tokyo Olympics. I mean, that seems to be occupying the airtime now, not only the sports competition, but it's as if politics and the pandemic have gone away, and they haven't. But right now in the immediate future, I would agree that it's about the economy, but there's also this divide. Biden, unfortunately, didn't reach the mark that he wanted to around July 4th, Independence Day, in terms of the vaccination rollout and those magical numbers trying to get closer to herd immunity. It's sort of fallen apart along partisan lines, just as the Delta variant is taking off here. So there's still a lot of uncertainty. But as somebody who teaches public diplomacy, where we focus every day on active listening and engagement and dialogue, that's a continual process. It doesn't always have an end goal in mind, but you have to be really open to the other's point of view. And if we're not able to do that internally in the United States, how can we possibly do this internationally? It's a real problem. The media tend to fan the flames because they play to their audience.
Right, of course.
So the people watching Fox News are not watching CNN. So
of course, US voters, their views on foreign affairs, it definitely matters when it comes to the sort of clout President Biden has when he's handling foreign policy, and observers abroad are also quite concerned about the apparent lack of interest. But, well, domestically, Mark, Biden's vaccine rollout, while it was very speedy and he was able to pass the $1.9 trillion stimulus package within just weeks of taking office, it seems now that he's facing new challenges with the Delta variant rampant, and also the Republicans pushing back against his massive spending plans. Do you think the steady support that he's been seeing in recent months, do you think it's going to start to slip? What do you think are the major challenges that he's going to face in keeping support for the Democrats steady, especially with the upcoming midterm election?
Well, if he gets the infrastructure bill successfully through in a bipartisan manner, that will be a huge success, because that is a big job creator. And if he can actually get 10 Republicans on board, that will break the hyper-partisanship that we've seen over the last 5 years, probably longer, more than a decade in Congress. But it's going to be tough. There is a lot of horse trading that is going on right at the moment in the US around that, and that bipartisanship could flounder or founder even in the next few days. Then it comes down to what you might call the human infrastructure bill, the huge 3.2 trillion, 3.5 trillion, I think it's gone up to at the moment, package that covers taxes, that covers care, that covers climate action, that really would be the underpinning achievement of the Biden government if he is able to get that through. They're trying to drive that through on the budget reconciliation process, which is about, basically, it's about finance acts and spending federal money. And that can go through on a simple majority vote. They don't need a supermajority. They don't need the Republicans on board. But the big achievement for Biden would be holding his own party together in that. Not all Democrats are convinced that this is the best way forward. But if you can get that kind of stimulus through at home and probably avoid wars abroad, and thereafter, Afghanistan is not looking great. Other areas of the world could still be problematic. And just build those relations that Professor Snow was talking about. So he's had a successful G7, he had a successful NATO summit, he's even met Putin, and they both walked away from it, I think, feeling that they got what they wanted from that meeting. All of those things, if they can be brought together, then Biden looks in good shape for next year. But it's all risky, and any one of those could fall.
Right, well, we have many months left to look forward to what he's going to do next to build back better, of course, and strengthen US alliances around the world. Well, this is all we have time for today, but that was Dr. Mark Shanahan, Head of Department of Politics and International Relations at the University of Reading, and Dr. Nancy Snow, Distinguished Professor of Public Diplomacy at the Kyoto University of Foreign Studies. Thank you both so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And to our viewers, as always, thank you very much for watching.